Ahoj všichni, rád bych vám ukázal záznam z mezinárodní soutěže v debatování, která se odehrávala v Praze. Tohle je jedno z kol, ve kterém jsem debatoval já a můj kamarád Petr a konkrétně se jedná o téma, že svět, ve kterém lidé mají kompletní kontrolu nad expresí svých emocí, takže například brek, úsměv, tělesný jazyk, mimika a tak dále, tak je lepší než svět, ve kterém žijeme dneska. Jedná se o takzvanou hypotetickou tezi, to znamená, debatéři dostanou nějakou pozici, musí ji zastávat a nejedná se o nějakou legalizaci nebo změnu nějakých názorů, jedná se především o tom, že vy musíte zastávat, že tento svět je lepší než něco hypotetického, co tu zatím ještě nemáme. Tato diskuze se vede v angličtině a je takzvaně řízena pravidly britské parlamentní debaty. Pokud vás zajímalo, jak tento typ soutěžních debat funguje, přihlašte se na náš debatní kroužek v popisku tohoto videa. Může vám to pomoci zlepšit se v retorice, v angličtině, případně v analytických schopnostech a argumentaci. Doufám, že vás to bude bavit. Mějte se krásně. Čau.
So, guys, we're talking essentially about should people have control over their emotional expression, right? We do believe on our side of the case that they do, because essentially we only can be perceived through how we behave in the world, right? Most of the types of other expressions are freely available for us to choose how we want to express ourselves, what we want to do with it, right? For example, clothes, for example, the way I speak, for example, the way I act within the world, right? Emotions are very specific in this, in that they are either conscious or unconscious. I can choose to be happy, I can choose to smile, I can choose to laugh. That's perfect, that's great, that's what we want more of, right? But there's others where I cannot choose them. For example, a lot of stress, a lot of pressure builds up on me. I come to work, the project I'm working on falls through. I have to concentrate, I have to put 100%, I have to be on my game, but all I feel like is crying. I feel like breaking down and crying. I have zero control of this and it has impacts on me, right? Why this is very important is that we do believe that this is sort of a burden placed on people. It's a burden of having emotions. It's a burden we didn't choose. It's a burden we cannot choose. And we're saying, let's change that. Let's give people the option to actually control their emotions and express themselves however they see fit. No, thank you. Now, that's basically the main point. Now, last point that I'm going to bring to the framing is that on day-to-day basis, how it kind of looks. As I already presented, things can mount up. Things can basically like pile up on me. I can feel sad. I cannot afford to feel sadness. That's how the world works. We don't have this openness to expressing of emotions all the time. As I said, for example, workplace, but other parts can be essentially where I'm at a situation where, for example, there's a person I intensely dislike, but because of the way that I was raised, because of the way that I was formulated, now my emotional response normally is to just laugh and just like to make the light of the situation, even though this in the long term degrades me. More on that later. Now, to our points. Number one, we do believe that in the world that the opposition is trying to preserve, there's going to be less understanding. Less understanding because, as I already pointed out, I may have different intentions than what my emotions show because they are unconscious, right? I didn't choose to express myself through crying, and now everybody sees me as a crybaby, sees me as weak, sees me, etc., as like, for example, emotional, blah, blah, blah. That's something that actually happens on day-to-day basis, especially because I didn't choose how to express myself through this. And how does this actually like work out in the world is that actually because I am not fully in control of my emotions, sometimes when I might be kind and when I'm trying to understand a person, the way I was conditioned to deal with sadness is by joking, laughing, cracking jokes, etc. Right? By like laughing at the situation, making light of it. That's very important because like I'm not trying to seem as an insincere person, but because of my emotional expression that is put out there unconsciously, I'm basically not in control of this. I will keep to my word and take opening.
I am still going to be equally as sad on either side of the house. On our side of the house, Don's going to give me a hug because I'm crying. On your side of the house, I am just sad.
No, because if I'm sad and I want to express the sadness with a person that will give me a hug as you replying, I will show sadness, I will cry, and I will get the hugs that I deserve. On the other side, if I'm with an abusive person in a relationship, but I have been conditioned through essentially, like for example, my parents, that I should just take it on the chin, I should just shut up, show a strong face, and I never show emotions, I will not express the disapproval of the behavior of my partner ever, because they will not see it, because I'm not able to access these emotions. That's very important, guys, because just because I can choose to, for example, smile or laugh, be pleasant around people, there are certain factors that might prevent me from doing this. And that is the second point that we bring into this debate, and that is essentially like there are certain people for whom it is harder to express their emotions, how the mainstream accepts the emotions to be presented. That could be, for example, autistic people who have or like antisocial people who have a hard time actually showing certain emotions in appropriate situations. They might be with people, they might be having a good time, but they just have a stone cold face on there as an expression, right? It is not their choice, and they are not even aware that they're not smiling. Inside of their brain they're smiling, but to the outside of the world, basically they're just frowning, disapproving of the situation and angry. They're not, because they are not, and they would be better off if they could control their emotions and could basically put themselves to, oh, now I want to show happiness, now I want to smile, so I'm just going to be like the most radiant person in a room. That's what I'm going to do, right? So that is essentially like how this, in practice, this better communication is going to play out. The same thing can be, as I already mentioned, the social conditioning, which has a huge impact on how I show emotions and how I'm like basically like working with my emotions. Because essentially, if I have been conditioned, as I have said, to never show my emotions, for example, or for example, a lot of women are told to be kind of like obedient, to like not question the other person, to not show directly their emotions, and they're basically told that they shouldn't do it. Then, when they grow up from like little girls conditioned in this way, when they grow up, it's much harder for them to like basically show dissatisfaction with situation, to show disapproval of a situation, to show anger, to show any of these emotions, because for example, 15, 18 years they've been told never to show it. It's very difficult, and it takes years of therapy to work through these barriers and actually show how they feel on the outside. Why this is important, guys, is because what we are presenting has an immediate effect within the society. Immediately these people can access their emotions and they can show them. They are not burdened by the fact that essentially they are disadvantaged in some sort of a way and cannot really work with it and cannot really show it outwardly. They are basically given a choice immediately to express themselves. And we believe that it is their right to do so, as they can choose to do with other types of behavior, like speaking, like clothing, as I have presented. Lastly, there is a point of safety. We do believe that a lot of predators look for prey or their victims in that the person that unconditionally shows fear is basically picked by the predator to be abused because they know they can get away with it. Most people cannot hide their fear directly, and therefore these predators can prey on them. If the person can choose not to feel the fear and not to show it in an extent, then essentially these people are more protected from these types of predators. For these reasons, vote for government.
The first thing that we hear from OG is that it's somewhat arbitrary that we cannot control our emotions or something like that. I'm currently really want to drink that drink because it smells good, and I cannot show off my sense of smell, nor my sense of hearing or something like that. There are a lot of things about human bodies which are imperfect and create trouble in our lives. The deal with that is that we overcome and we adapt, we change ourselves somehow. And that's why, first of all, in this speech, I want to note the actual difference that is going to appear in the world and in like humans when you actually don't have the ability to control your emotions. I think there are three things that we have to note here. Firstly, I think overall we are talking about a world where like the non-control of our emotions have never existed. So I think overall people are going to be more habituated into a place where they control their emotions like too much. That is to say, if there is such danger, as OG wants to say, about expressing your emotions involuntarily, then people are going to put like those emotions within themselves and be overly kind of protective of those emotions, just in case something shitty is going to happen, which also is going to drive up every single impact that I'm going to be talking about in this speech. And the second thing I want to talk about is that in our side of the house, we actually have control mechanisms on how to regulate your emotions in other ways, which are actually going to be getting a lot of the benefits that they wanted to, or going to be avoiding a lot of the negative impacts that they actually talked about. Like, for example, me being able to, I don't know, not control my anger or something like that is an actual learnable thing that we can also have on our side of the house, which means that the extremes that they talk about in very stressful situations where I cannot cry or cannot seem angry or something like that are also going to be regulated on our side of the house. The case that we're actually bringing to you is about the everyday interactions. Not if you're being abused by your husband, not if you're going to be bullied at work and not given a raise because you're called a crybaby or something like that. Those are not everyday instances. But when I simply need to make connections with other human beings that I might not know that well or something like that, things that are very crucial to me developing as a person, emotions play a key part in that, and especially involuntary emotions. Before I actually get to my arguments, sure.
Yeah, I'm appealing to your consistency. Do you prefer a world where people are not able to control their emotions at all, such as anger, crying, etc.? Or is there
I think we prefer a world where you cannot control your emotions, you can regulate them. I think there is a difference in that. That is to say, you're not in the habit of always having your emotions constricted, because that is what the world simply looks like. But again, in the most extreme circumstances, when that is necessary, you can do it to some degree. You can accept that you cannot always do it, sure. But what are the actual ramifications of suppressing your own emotions? Firstly, you're still going to have those emotions. I may not show anger, I'm still going to be angry. There are three things that are outside of emotions that are going to play into this. Firstly, other narratives which are stronger narratives, are going to suppress the actual emotion. For example, men don't cry or something like that, which means that if I have the option to cry and the world has told me don't cry, I will now have control over it and don't cry. Secondly, the social norms like not crying in a workplace or something like that. And lastly, three things that are just inconvenient or something like that. What does this mean, and why is this central to this debate? Firstly, dealing with actual emotions relies on you actually showing them in the first place. Whether it's just simply feeling those emotions out fully to the largest extent of you having a sense of how angry you are. Is this something I have to go to a therapist with and talk to a friend or something like that? Or can I just calm down in the situation? You have to actually act out those emotions, so to say. But also, in the worst instances, in terms of if I don't show that emotion, I suppress it and it becomes a larger issue and I feel unhappy because of it. Secondly, in terms of the relationships, and I think this also answers a lot of material that they brought out. My relationships rely on an emotional connection. That is all relationships pretty much are. I think on their side of the house, two things are going to happen. Firstly, the barrier is going to be raised for entry into an emotionally actually deep connection with another human being, because I'm much less likely to show any emotion on a regular day-to-day basis. Meaning that overall, we think you step into relationship with less people on their side of the house, which means that the POI that Helena pointed out, I wouldn't be close enough to Helena to even tell her verbally on their side of the house that I feel shit, even if that would exist on their side of the house. And the second of all, the quality of relationship is going to be less, because you're more likely to not show, again, emotion, not develop that deep connection. Because with most people, you develop a deep connection where you're, for example, share a similar experience. I'm sad, somebody consoles me, that's an emotional connection or something like that, or we share good times. But in a world where by social norms and other factors that you cannot yourself control, suppress your emotion to a degree, you're less likely to have those relationships. Thirdly, I think this creates an overall loop where you don't show emotion, which leads to you becoming emotionally suppressed, which leads to you not showing more emotion and stuff like that. Fourthly, noticing other people and actually communicating with other people becomes a lot harder. Not only because of the interactions rely on subtext and body language and something like this, things like that, but both. But if those both are removed and also have less emotion overall to go with them, then we think that these things that are overall involuntary in most interactions with other people are going to make communication less effective. Now they can, yes, cancel this out by saying that, oh, we do everything verbally, but that is not simply a situation, for example, with music or something, other things, with love, that simply words cannot express or something like that. I might cry if I say something very deep to another person involuntarily and not be in control of it, and may not want to because it seems awkward in that situation, but it deepens my connection with that person and I actually get a message across which is not verbal, right? And lastly, I think overall, if we could picture a world where people have developed somehow every mitigatory factor to you not showing emotion on an everyday basis, but still able to communicate effectively, that is simply just the world that we already are in. So overall, we say that in order for them to engage us in this debate, we say that you have to act with less emotion. If it's more emotion, they're simply non-comparative.
To be frank, I don't really understand the case of team opposition, because on one hand they're saying that you should be allowed to act out your emotions, you should be able to lose control of yourself, but at the same time they support a lot of mechanisms that suppress that. My PY would be on things like, which I asked, like meditation, therapy. All of these things already exist in status quo when you're able to try to control the way you express your anger, frustration, sadness, and yet they support it. They say, oh, we don't want to control it, we just want to restrict it, which, by the way, is the same word. So in our world, what we claim is that there is, number one, inconsistency, but number two, what we're going to prove, regardless of the weird framing that they provided, is that it's good for people to have as much control over these emotions, to pick ways when they want to express that, and this leads to a lot of positive benefits I will talk about in my speech. By the way, a vast chunk of our analysis from first speech was not addressed at all. Let's just acknowledge that. So, first of all, let's talk about what this debate is about. Opposition also claims that this debate is not about edge case scenarios where people cry at work, etc. Number one, my girlfriend cries every single day at school. I don't think that's an edge case. I think that's a significant minority of people who have extreme problem in this modern world to express their emotions controllably, which leads to things such as discrimination from their teachers. It leads to the fact that they're perceived wrongly, even though the way they express their emotions is different. I'm partly autistic. It's hard for me to express certain emotions, and then people assume that I'm thinking something else that I do. Why is it so important? It's important because we're losing ability to communicate with each other. It means I am being discriminated for things I don't want to do, and the other person assumes I'm a danger, or they assume that I'm doing something incorrectly, despite me actually doing those things that we agreed to be together. Now, second of all, even if we're not talking about these edge case scenarios, I do believe that in every single situation, in every single human interaction, there is a power dynamic. Meaning that even if you love your boyfriend, your mother, or whatever, there are certain situations when even people you feel comfortable with, you don't want to express your emotions. And this is one of the craziest analysis, or craziest in a good way, good analysis, Peter brought to you in his first speech, that it's good to choose time and place when you want to express these emotions. I think opening opposition just simply doesn't understand the fact that in our world, you're not unable to, is it grammatically correct? I think yes. Not unable to express your emotions at all, it's just that you have chance to pick when you do it or not. So for instance, if you're saying that your co-debater wants to know that you're sad, just tell her that. But we're not forcing your subconsciousness to act upon things that are not influenced by you, such as your environment, whether your hormone levels are high, or if you're choleric, etc. So we believe that this motion in our case that we present applies to the vast majority of situations. It's fair, it's debatable. I don't know what opening opposition is doing in this debate. Now, let's look at the arguments they try to present. First of all, they told us that you need, and I think I like this sentence a lot, you need to act out your emotion because it is providing you support, etc., and people around you. Already, Peter had a really good response in his POI towards the second speaker of opposition, when he explained that exactly this timing and the environment in which you have ability to choose when you want to act out is allowing you to then heal yourself.
Why is it important? It's important because in certain situations when you express yourself or your emotions subconsciously, it can damage you in the long run. For instance, the argument about vulnerability, how predators are seeking their prey based on the fear they feel. So if you're not comfortable with someone and they're making you really, really unsafe, it's the best scenario where you're just able to show dominance and get out of the situation. This is, by the way, not happening in the status quo, not only because therapy and meditation are not sufficient ways to, provide emotional support and care, but it also means that these people are unable to continue. I would really encourage closing opposition to provide some POIs so we can engage with you guys. Guys, I'm talking to you. More POIs. Okay, now, second thing that I think is really important is the fact that this motion also applies to people who are how do I say it? Ethically or equity correct, non-average expression of emotions. So people who are non-neurotypical, such autistic people. All of these expressions are hard to imagine. Now, let me explain impacts of all of these arguments that I think Peter honestly didn't provide that well in his speech, so I'm going to finish it up for him. Number one, we believe that it harms the individual, the person who is actually expressing these emotions. It damages them unfairly. It means that their lives are limited in this area. Number two, it really limits the person who is acting, it limits any kind of social interaction whatsoever. So the global social argument is that there is less cooperations on levels that people would be willing to do if they knew how to argue. So imagine this motion in a world where people are unable to communicate directly, transparently. This is exactly what they're doing on the team opposition. Now, honestly, to be honest, I'm slightly running out of rebuttal because I think the whole chunk of opposition is being destroyed. So please, if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to engage. No. Okay, so let me get to other cases which we think are quite good. Go for it. Thank you, I love you.
Autistic people are still not going to be showing their emotion in the correct time because now it becomes a social norm that you have to learn when you have to show your emotions. Autistic people are still not going to be able to understand these social norms that are underlying when it's okay for me to show the emotions.
Okay, I don't know if you know how autistic brain works, but what is happening is that you're learning, you're seeking pattern behavior, right? So you're identifying patterns. So in adults, it's really hard to diagnose autism because people already learned a lot of social cues and they're acting upon it. However, the subconscious part of their brain, which is not allowing them to seek these patterns, is exactly is forcing them to act out in ways that is not typical for most people. I would like to also add another layer to this impact, and that is the way we perceive women in environments. So any kind of social group that acts differently or is behaved in a certain way is then culturally judged for ways that they just cannot control or we just genuinely think are fine, right? So if you're able to adjust to these situations or to these norms, exactly as we described in any of these cases, it is positive. Now, last point I would like to note, because I'm just trying to come up with stuff now. We believe that these emotions, or being able to control these emotions, helps society a lot because emotions are contrary to logical thinking, right? If you have logical truth or if you have any kind of logical sense, it allows for people to communicate and find common ground. It's unable to do that with emotions because you do not control them and every single person perceives them in a different way. So the more likely we're able to, the likelier we are to find a common ground or a common language that expresses the same ideas, the more likely we are to grow as a society. Thank you.
You already know what our case is because Tommy has already run it beautifully, but now to tell opening government again what our case is, because our case is simple. Because you're going to be feeling these feelings on either side of the house. I'm going to be sad with the desire to cry on either side of the house. The question is whether or not I can control that my tears are coming out and I am actively crying. It is important, we believe in opening opposition, that it is important that you show this emotion for you as an individual, but also that others see that you have these emotions. And we do believe that this is specifically about the kind of emotion that you're unlikely to be controlling, because as Tommy has said, you're likely to have some level of control about your emotions on either side of the house, because once again, this feeling of whether or not being an emotional person is good or bad, those narratives are also going to be equal on either side of the house. This means that this is specifically about the kind of emotions that you do not have full control over, or where you just feel like it's not enough and worth the effort to show these emotions, like laughing about the monkey joke because I feel like it is funny when it is not, but I just kind of have to. But most of the time, and more importantly, it is about the big kind of things that you are talking about, and this is why it is so important. And I'm just quickly going to be going through why it is so important that you see emotions of others and why you're showing your own emotion. But I think it is incredibly important that you're most likely going to be not showing your emotion at the point where you do not have to show your emotion. Opening government's case kind of on the perception that you have the idea, that you know the time when you are going there, that you are going out and find time to cry, when you go out to just meet and love. We do not believe that it is likely that this is going to be happening, especially about the emotions that we feel that you need to be showing, because otherwise you're not going to, because it is socially stigmatized. Why? Because of all of the analysis that opening government gives you. If you cry, you are a crybaby. If you are crying as a man specifically, you're not strong enough. And especially within the patriarchal system, it is incredibly important for men to be seen as strong. And therefore, they are never going to be crying. At the point where men are told, you're not strong if you are not crying, they are not going to go out and cry to their friends. The only ones in which they are going out to cry is where they cannot stop themselves from crying. Second of all, also just a big level of privacy that you do. Second point is misogyny. Because telling women that you're too emotional is a very easy tool of control, which is likely going to be continuously going to be happening. So we are also seeing that now women are also crying less because they don't have to. Because they don't have to be seen as overly emotional women, which does suck. But we believe that it is good that we are seeing that we are pushing women too far, which I'm going to go deeper into. But second of all, the privacy point. Because most of the time you don't want people to know. If you want people to know how you are feeling, you are not going to be controlling this level of feelings, and you are going to be showing them. So it is either because it is seen as bad to have it, or it is embarrassing. Like the amount of times I've cried for my ex, I would not like to admit. But the fact that I'm doing it is just in terms of privacy. Third of all, also often it's an inconvenience, like it smudges up my mascara if I'm crying, so I'm likely to be stopping those things, but it also just means it's seen as something negative. So the comparative is going to be that people are showing significantly less emotions at the point where you do not have to show emotions for all of the reasons I just gave you why emotions are seen as badly. Why do we believe that it's so important that you as an individual are showing emotions? Tommy already gave you significant reasons, but I'm going to be extending on this. Number one, unless you're showing your emotions, you are unlikely to be actively learning about them. What makes you cry? You are more likely to just suppress this. I don't have to think about this. But at the point where you are crying, when there's nothing else you can do, then recognize that you are really fucking sad. You are going to be thinking about this. But what is also but then second of all, you're also more likely to be bottling up about them. At the point where you're not thinking about the underlying reasons why you're crying, because you do not take the time to think about why you are crying, because again, when you cry, you kind of have to think about it because you can't do anything else. You're more likely to be bottling up, and this is where these emotions become dangerous. If we are talking about things like anger, we do believe that it is good that you might be shouting into the world about this, because you're more likely to be just getting more and more and more angry, and that is when you end up punching people. So we believe that it is good if these emotions are coming out in a form of release, because very often these involuntary ways of emotion are forms of release that you're giving. But then third of all, you're more likely to be addressing them with others. When these are the things that you're going to be bottling up on their side of the house, you're less likely to be talking about them. Those are the situations where you are crying with your friends because you now have to tell your friend, because you can't hide that you're so sad that you have to be crying. These vital communications about the most deep feelings that you're having are completely lost at the point where we do not have these points where you are reacting about them. And this is why it's so incredibly important. CG.
Look, because people already have a lot of control over their emotional expression, and because of the social cues you already say exist, it means that even in the status quo, men don't cry at work, or at least not very often at all.
Yes, but they cry less on your side of the house. That is literally our case. That in the most extreme cases, where it is the most important that we are talking about them, the most important that you let these feelings out, you're letting them out. From OG, we get this idea about it is a bad burden put on people. We believe that the actual burden that is put on people is the feelings that you have. It is not that you have to cry because your degree is so horrific. It's that you feel so bad because your degree is so incredibly difficult. But what is incredibly important is that we are normalizing these feelings only at the point where we know other people have these feelings. At the point where we consistently pushing them down, we do not know that we all cry because we fucking decided to study law here. So this means that there's an understanding between people because you're showing the same emotions. This might be in the most extreme cases, but also in the less extreme cases, when we all together look in disgust at something, then you know that you are together into this, you understand this togetherness, which is exclusively when people see it. With autistic people, it is unlikely, you're going to be suffering on either side of the house, because you still do not know whether or not you react correctly, you do not know whether or not the emotional reaction you're showing on their side of the house or this side of the house is the correct one. Why is it so important that you see the emotions of others? Tommy already gave you a great case about how emotions are so incredibly important for our communications. But continuing on this point, why it is so important for these like expressions and these extreme cases? Because number one, it shows boundaries. It's not good if you cry at work and you might be disrespected, but the people at work who have feelings, and most of your co-workers will have some sort of empathy, realize that we have now reached a point that we shouldn't be at. In the worst case scenarios, it sets a boundary where people get over. When your joke goes too far and makes somebody cry, you know that this is a boundary that cannot cross. It is incredibly difficult for people to set boundaries themselves, which is why we think it is so important that your body, through involuntary reactions, are giving these boundaries to protect yourself from things going wrong. People already don't show their emotions enough. Do not make them show them even less. We back you to a pause.